Hey everybody, it's your professor here. I hope you guys all had a really excellent Thanksgiving break. I know I did, and I cannot believe it's almost the end of the semester, but it is. This is our second to last chapter, and I definitely am going to be lecturing obviously today and then also on the next chapter. They're both very, very important pieces of information for you guys to have. So today what we're going to be talking about is something that is used very, very widely out in the field, and it's a form of technically it's a form of CBT, which is something I'm sure you've heard about, you're going to hear about, cognitive behavior therapy. And this is the idea that when we're working with people therapeutically to help them change their behaviors, we're also going to have to look at their thought process, and we're helping to sort of clue them into the things that they're thinking that are contributing to the behaviors that are resulting. Because pretty much everybody that's out there, whether they're a mental health patient or even just an everyday person like you, yourself, me, myself, we all have certain behaviors that we do that we would like to change, right? And you'll often hear people say, I want to be different, or gosh, why can't I keep myself from doing whatever it is that I'm doing that I don't want to do? How come I can't change that behavior? So definitely when we're talking about individuals with a personality disorder, and today we're particularly going to be referring to people with borderline personality disorder, which is something that is very, very prevalent out in the world, definitely in mental health treatment. You're going to come across, if you're working in the field, a lot of people with this condition. They tend, unfortunately, to have a very difficult time sort of getting through life, and they tend to present repeatedly to definitely things like therapy, but then also you'll tend to see them, unfortunately, in the hospital a lot of times as well. Um, one of the main issues that these individuals struggle with is an inability to regulate their emotions. So, for the most part, most of us are on fairly an even keel most of the time. And then, if something negative happens or something upsetting happens, we may get fired up a little bit, or some people do even get fired up a lot. You probably know people like this. But these individuals, unfortunately, sort of go from 0 to 60. And whether that's getting heated or whether that's getting sad, unfortunately, they don't really have a very good way of sort of what we call self-regulating or sort of reining themselves in. And a big piece of this emotional sort of instability comes from the way they view the world, their perceptions of things, many times being off, not really being accurate, not really being based, well, we say based in reality, it's not like a psychotic thing, but they're basically perceiving things in a way that is not realistic, and that results in them having these very, very extreme emotional reactions to situations that don't really require that. And then the behaviors that result from having these very, very strong emotions are usually not good behaviors. They're usually sort of over the top, or many, many times they're self-destructive behaviors. All right. So many times, unfortunately, we see these individuals engaging in acts of self-harm, whether that is cutting behaviors, whether that's burning, whether that is an actual suicide attempt. Many times we see people do what we call a superficial suicide attempt, which is something that is not necessarily going to kill you, but definitely is going to require you to get some sort of medical attention, bring you into the emergency mental health system, the crisis system. And unfortunately, a lot of these individuals actually, on some level, sometimes even consciously seek attention through these types of behaviors. So the way that we actually respond to them at the crisis level, which is where I work and where I function as a professional, is actually very different than if someone without this type of condition is to present with the same type of thing going on. So what I'm going to talk about today is a type of therapy. I'm going to tie back into that. So what I'm going to talk about is a type of therapy called dialectical behavior therapy. Most people refer to it as DBT for short, because obviously dialectical behavior therapy is really, really long. This is a type of therapy that was invented by a woman named Marsha Linehan. She is a PhD, a doctorate level psychologist, and very interestingly, she actually came out many years after having developed this type of therapy for borderline personality disorder. And it was a huge New York Times article. She actually admitted that, yes, she had borderline personality disorder for many, many years. Actually, the majority of her youth was spent inpatient hospitalization, including state hospitalization, which is for when there just is really nothing that we can do with individuals, and very severe behaviors. She would bang her head against the wall, attempted suicide many, many times in very destructive ways. And to see this woman now, I mean, she's just so functional and she's very, very healthy and she's able to help a lot of people. So this type of therapy is a type of CBT, which is where we're integrating that person's thoughts and behaviors, and we're sort of talking about and working with all of those elements to help them improve. But it's very, very specific to individuals with borderline personality disorder, and it can be very, very helpful for keeping them out of the hospital, which is something that is a major, major goal. Okay, test question. For individuals with borderline personality disorder, one of the major, major goals we have is to keep them out of the hospital. Now, you mentioned me, or you may have heard me say a few minutes ago that I work in the crisis setting. Okay, so I'm in the emergency room, and a big piece of my job is to figure out when people come in a crisis of some sort, what happens next? Do they need to come into the hospital? Is that what must happen? Or is there something else that we should be doing? So for individuals that come in who have borderline personality disorder, and these tend to be many times people that I know because I deal with them on a repeated basis, or just the behaviors are so obviously borderline in nature that it's very easy for me to pick up. I had mentioned that the way that we address those are very different. And that is because one of our major goals is to keep these people out of the hospital, because we have found clinically over time that it actually does not benefit them to bring them into the hospital. If anything, it reinforces their negative attention seeking by hurting themselves. Okay, so just a quick idea. Let's say that someone without borderline personality disorder finds out that their husband is leaving them, and she becomes very, very desperate and cuts herself, on each wrist, enough that we maybe need to glue it together, but not deeply enough that we know she was really, really trying to do it and she really, could have killed herself. Just enough to sort of make a statement of, I'm in pain. And then we have some family members that come with her and say, listen, we're really worried about her, but we could take her home. We're not really sure what to do. In this situation, we're going to be thinking, okay, a lot of different things. Well, this person has family support, but, it looks like they really were in a bad moment when they did this. Are they going to be stable outside of the hospital? Are they not? And so at this point, we're going to be probably strongly considering bringing this person into the hospital. Whereas if it's somebody that I have seen a million, billion, bazillion times, this is someone that I know struggles with this borderline personality disorder. Maybe they got in a fight with their significant other, and so they sort of scratch themselves, on either wrist. And I have seen this, you guys, where people come in an ambulance literally with like a cat scratch on each wrist. And they're saying, see, I'm suicidal, I need to be in the hospital. For those individuals, we're going to really look at things in a very different way. Sometimes even when the person is telling you, I am suicidal, and you know that they have what we call a secondary gain, which is there's something that they want besides, there's something going on sort of underneath the surface. So this individual is desiring attention from this action. They're desiring to come into the hospital because in the hospital, you guys may remember from that case study we did with Eric, who had a lot of those kind of cluster B personality disordered issues where, he was in the hospital a lot. It becomes a place where it's sort of an escape from reality. It's escape from the real world. Some people really enjoy being treated like a patient. They enjoy the sort of special attention they get. They get to sort of be taken care of, be the victim, have people, you get what I'm saying. So it becomes something that is actually unhealthy for the person, and it's reinforcing this negative attention getting for us to take someone like this and to give them what they want of putting them in the hospital. So this is all a very case by case kind of situation. But when we're dealing with individuals with borderline personality, one of the ways that we keep them from even being in any of these crisis situations is to maintain them as an outpatient. Okay, that means as just living in the community through this type of therapy, dialectical behavior therapy. All right, this is one of the major ways that we keep people out of the hospital, and it works. I mean, boy, does it work. The hospital that I work at has a DBT program with probably, I want to say there's probably 30 to 35 patients. And I have a list of their names actually in my office, because whenever they come into the emergency room, the first thing that we need to do is get in touch with their therapist. But I can tell you truly that I almost never, I mean, knock on wood, because I got to work tomorrow, but I never see these people. They do not come into the hospital. And let me tell you that the only way to get into DBT is to be one of those people who is so frequently in the hospital that it becomes ridiculous. It becomes counterproductive. They sort of, an alarm flashes like, all right, what are we going to do with this person? So this program really has taken all 30, let's say, of these people and really helped them to achieve stability. It's very, very effective. And we're not the only program in our area. There actually are 2 other programs, actually maybe 3 or 4, that are in just the Berks County area where I work. So this is a program that exists, all over the country, and it is excellent at helping people with borderline personality disorder to be stable. It's actually a very, very involved program. It's not just like going to counseling once a week, how, most people that would be in counseling would do. They actually have individual and group therapy. Every single week, they do an hour of group and they do an hour of individual. Their therapist is actually technically on call 24/7, although not. This is very different than other types of therapy. Let's say I go to a therapist. I don't have that person's cell phone number. Okay. I'm not calling them any hour of the day and night. Whereas in DBT, the patient actually has their therapist's cell phone number. Now, there is definitely an understanding and very firm rules set as to when to use this cell phone, sort of connection, and when not to, and how not to. So let's say that the individual is having a hard time and they need to reach out to their therapist before they do something like cut themselves. All right, that's appropriate. What you can't do, however, and many people, this is part of the disorder, would be to call your therapist and say, okay, I'm about to take a bottle of, 100 pills, goodbye, and then turn off your phone. All right. So that your therapist can't reach you, can't get back to you. These are things that happen very commonly. Those are very common borderline behaviors. So what would happen is there are rules in place for after something like that happened, there has to be a period of time before you can actually speak with your therapist. This is something that in the emergency room we observe also. So I mentioned to you that I have a list of everybody that's in the DBT program at my particular hospital, so that when they come into the hospital, I can identify, okay, they're with our program. Let's say, and again, this hasn't happened in forever, let's say that I get somebody that comes in and they have cut themselves pretty deep, really any amount of cutting themselves, but they come in, they cut themselves, and they say, can you please call my therapist and tell them that I'm having this really hard time? What I'm going to do, and this is by the rules of the program, I am going to call the therapist and I'm going to say, hey, Dr. So-and-so, I have your patient here. However, the patient knows that from the time that they have injured themselves, they cannot speak to their therapist for at least 24 hours. And their therapist will not take their call. They will not call them back. If that sounds a little bit harsh, I think at first I kind of felt that way too, but you've got to understand that this is because we do not want to encourage these individuals to use negative attention-seeking means to get in touch with their therapist, to get the attention of their therapist. So there are those little sort of parameters that, yes, we're going to let the therapist know, but that they cannot then contact their therapist for that certain amount of time. And I believe actually if they abuse the phone privileges that they can lose those phone privileges. But from what I've heard from the therapists that do this type of therapy, people actually really respect the phone thing and for the most part really don't abuse it. Also because they don't want to lose it and they want to have that connection to the therapist. So one thing also that I really wanted to mention in this week's chapter in particular, we're talking about behavioral strategies. And one of the things that they do in DBT with individuals with borderline personality to really, really help them, it's a great tool. It's called a behavior chain analysis. And this is actually a piece of paper, a form. If you're interested, of course, you can Google it and you'll find like a million different things. But a behavior chain is basically a tool, an actual written tool that the individual themselves can use, or certainly you can do it in the office with your therapist. Either way, you would be sort of processing it with your therapist. And it is actually a tool that you use after you have done an undesired behavior like cutting yourself, for example. So one of the neat things about it is that it really helps the individual to visually see on paper, step back from their own experience of what happened and look as an outsider then after the fact at exactly how this played out, what led up to it, what ultimately happened. And then hopefully once they get that perspective, then they're going to be less likely to repeat it again. So the way that it would work, the first part of it, they actually are going to be looking at the things that happened before the event. What was the setting that the event took place? So let's take the cutting yourself. You might say something like, I was really, really tired. I hadn't slept the night before. I was hungry. I was drinking, certainly is one that's probably pretty common. Whatever it was to lead up to it. Or maybe it was something like, I was in a great mood. I was doing really well, and then this thing happened and it sent me over the edge, whatever. So you're going to talk about exactly in detail what happened before the event, the setting that it took place. And then you're going to talk about the event itself. Here, the individual is going to describe exactly what took place, all of the sensations they were having, emotions they were feeling, exactly what was going on in their body, physically, emotionally. What we really want to look at in this piece of the event, though, is their perception, because everything is filtered. Basically, an event takes place, okay? And really the important part for us in terms of working with people therapeutically is how did they perceive that? So let's say that the individual's event was, I was supposed to go to dinner with my boyfriend, but then he called and canceled because he has work early the next day, okay? We're going to then, yes, okay, that's what actually happened. But the important thing that I want to know is, what did that individual take away from that? Okay. And most likely it's going to be something like rejection oriented, like, okay, I've been waiting all week for this. I had already planned and he's cheating. And usually it's something crazy, like he's cheating on me and he doesn't love me and he hates me and he never wants to be with me again. So that we want to hear that individual's perception. Honestly, what was it that they thought? Oh, well, he's out with somebody else or whatever it is. Then, of course, we're going to get into the actual behavior itself, the cutting. So what was it that took us to that point of cutting? Did we have a razor, stashed away in our room for this type of thing? Did we actually go out to the store and buy something and bring it home and harm ourselves with it? What exactly took place in that moment? What were the thoughts around it? Were there thoughts of, what, I've been doing so well, I haven't cut myself in 6 months, but F it, no, but he doesn't care about me. Screw it, I'm just going to do it anyway, I don't care. Maybe it was something like, I'm going to show him, this is going to show him that he hurt me. Any of these things, these are thoughts that are really important for us to know what that person's speech was in their mind when they were doing this action. And then, of course, we're going to look at the aftermath, because once the emotions do come back to a normal level, most likely that individual is going to be feeling terribly low. Okay. Because at this point, after we did the problem behavior, now we have the feelings of guilt. We have the remorse. We have the shame. Maybe we still are angry. We still are fired up about it. Maybe we have some fear that, I cut myself again and it helped me. And now I'm really worried that I'm going to go back to doing this all the time. Maybe I'm embarrassed, like, oh, I can't believe I did this again, or whatever it is. So you see, this is the chain that is constructed, and it's all done on paper. And either the individual is going to do it themselves and bring it into therapy, and you're going to talk through with the therapist exactly what happened, or, again, you can do it in the session. But just to close out here, one thing that's actually really funny that the head of our DBT program told me one time is that these things can actually be so detailed and take so much time that one of his patients said it helps her not to cut herself, just knowing that she's going to have to do one of these things because it takes so long. She hates doing it. And you know what? Hey, if that actually works to help deter you from whatever the behavior is, then that is a positive thing too. But this is just a really, really cool form of therapy that I actually used to sit in on a lot of these group sessions when I was a graduate intern. And I feel like everybody can kind of get a little something out of it, but it really does a good job at helping people with borderline personality disorder. All right. Hope you learned a whole bunch. Sorry for the long kind of winded speech here, but I will make sure there are a lot of test questions on the video, and that should help you guys because I know you tend to do better on those questions than on the chapter. All right, talk to you soon. Bye.